Hi, folks. My name is Josh Short. I'm the Artistic Director here at the Wilbury Theatre Group in Providence, and this is the second in our Road to Reopening conversation series. Last week, we spoke with Brandon Marshall, who's back again. Hi, Brandon.
Hi, Josh. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well. Good to be back.
Well, thanks for being back. We had such great feedback from people after our conversation a couple of weeks ago. You gave us such an incredible overview of COVID-19 and what organizations would have to deal with before they could even think about reopening. So I'm really grateful for that. Thank you, Brandon.
Pleasure.
For anybody who missed that conversation, you can watch it on our website or on the Wilbury Group's YouTube channel. Brandon is a PhD at Brown University, where he is also an epidemiologist, and has agreed to come back with us today for this special conversation with the people of art, culture, and tourism at the City of Providence. Before we get started, though, Brandon, I was just wondering if you could just give us sort of an update on how things are going in the state of Rhode Island so far in terms of this pandemic. When we last spoke, it was just after Mother's Day, I think, and we were wondering if there was going to be an uptick in the number of cases detected. And we've also moved along a bit closer towards phase 2, which I believe starts at June 1st. So I was wondering, how's phase 1 going, and how are things looking for us?
So I think, it's important to keep in mind that we are one of the most highly affected states. We have the 4th highest per capita case count in the nation and the 7th highest mortality rate. So, we've been very highly affected by COVID, and the response, therefore, has been very aggressive, as it should be. But we're turning the corner. When we look at some of the key metrics that are important for tracking this disease, hospitalizations, for example, have been declining for almost 4 weeks now. As of today, the Rhode Island Department of Health reported 218 COVID hospitalizations, and that's down from a peak of 375 at the end of April. So that's a great sign. That means that our healthcare system's not overloaded and we're moving in the right direction. And that number has continued to decrease even with some of the reopening that we've seen in phase 1. So that's a great sign. The second metric I would say that I've been following and that we talked about last time is the percent of tests that are done that come back positive. That number should actually be low. That means that you're doing a lot of tests and you're not getting a lot of positives. And when we spoke right after Mother's Day, Josh, that was hitting around 10%, which was just around the threshold that the World Health Organization recommends for reopening. We're now more in the 5% range. So that's great. And that continues to be a metric that is moving in the right direction as well. So overall, I'm feeling comfortable with where we're headed. And I think moving into phase 2 of the reopening on June 1st is an appropriate move given where all of these metrics are pointing.
Thanks, Brandon. And can you just remind us what phase 2 looks like in terms of the governor's plan? Is that reopening of some restaurants at 50% capacity? What else is part of that phase 2 that's coming up?
Yeah, great question. So, I recommend folks that want to learn more go to reopeningri.com, where there's a summary of what these phases look like. This one is called, I think, Navigating Our Way or Navigating the Waters. There's a nautical theme there. Phase 2 looks as follows. Primarily, we can see social gatherings up to 15 people. So that's probably going to be important for our discussion today. Some indoor dining will be reopened with lower capacity, as you mentioned, Josh. Salons, barbershops can reopen. I'm looking forward to getting my hair cut pretty soon.
Me too.
So that's key. And gyms as well. Outdoor recreation facilities, state parks are reopening. Now, what's important to keep in mind, though, is that these facilities, these businesses are reopening, but they're going to look a little bit different. We are going to have a lot of guidelines around mandatory mask wearing in these environments, maintaining social distancing, and doing a lot of cleaning and disinfecting of these environments. So, we're going to be able to go and get our haircut, but it's going to look a little bit different. And a lot of the details, as I mentioned, around reopeningri.com for those that are interested in learning more. But it's a good sign, and hopefully it will give people sense that we're returning to some semblance of normal. I think that's what we're going to start to see in phase 2, is that return to normal start to happen.
That's great. Well, that's great, Brandon. Thanks for the good news. I mean, that's I feel good about that. Let's bring it. So today, Stephanie Fortunato is the director of the City of Providence's Department of Arts, Culture, and Tourism, and Micah Salkind is the special projects manager for Arts, Culture, Tourism, and they've agreed to join us. Stephanie and Micah, are you there?
We're here and unmuted.
Great.
Hi,
Micah.
Stephanie.
Hi, Brendan. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Thanks for being here. How are you guys doing?
Okay.
Okay.
These strange times.
Strange times. You guys, you must be exhausted. I mean, I imagine that working in city government right now is just an incredibly stressful ordeal. So thank you. Thanks for all you've been doing. And the connection to arts organizations like ours from you and your department has been really extraordinary. So thank you for that. I think maybe not everybody knows what the Department of Arts, Culture, Tourism does. Would you mind just giving us an overview of what you do there and how it works?
So Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism, we are a unit of city government, and we sit in the planning division. Most of our work is focused in on community planning, community development, and most of the time, not these times, we are focused on bringing programs, bringing arts and culture into civic spaces. We work in public parks, we work in public places, we work in municipal buildings, rec centers, schools, libraries, the like, working to make sure that arts and culture is integral to those spaces and bringing our amazing artist community in to do that work. We also have some bureaucratic functions. So we provide some city services. Our jobs are to administer the special events permit and do some film registration, that sort of thing. We staff the Art Life Commission, which is our public art commission. And then really, we are the creative sector liaison. So we are the people on the inside who are helping artists and creatives navigate city governments. And we're trying to help make things happen. We have a small grant making capacity, which is an important support for our creative sector. But mostly we get phone calls where people say, well, we don't know who else to talk to in city government. So maybe you can help us do this crazy, awesome thing. And so it's usually our job to figure out how that can happen.
That's great. And one of the reasons Providence is the creative capital, right? Is you guys.
Absolutely.
So when this COVID started happening, how did that affect the artists that you deal with on a daily basis? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this has had a really dramatic effect on so many industries, every business really across the city. But for the creative sector, it's been particularly hard hit. You know, the artists that we work with, really their livelihoods were dramatically impacted by the closure of venues and by the end of the public programming that was happening. And I think that, you know, for us, it's really shown the ways in which artists who by necessity often are working multiple jobs to be able to really practice at a professional level. But the way that makes them more vulnerable to these kinds of crises. You know, they're not necessarily working in a system in which it was an easy access to the unemployment benefits, especially in the beginning there. And so I think we saw a lot of the limits of the way that the arts community is structured, the way that artists are actually compensated for the work that they do and the labor that they provide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it seems like Providence was one of the first and maybe the only city in Rhode Island to come out with this artist relief fund to support the artists within the city. Can you tell me a little bit about the Artist Relief Fund and what that's done and how that came about in partnership with the Rhode Island Foundation and RISCA?
Yeah, and I want to really thank Randy Rosenbaum and the team over at RISCA for their leadership in getting that Artist Relief Fund off the ground early on. I mean, they they saw what was going to be coming down the line, and they worked hard to pull in partners to make that possible. So with the Rhode Island Foundation and support from the New England Foundation for the Arts, working with the Alliance of Artists Communities, and with the partnership of our office, really we're able to pull together a fund, $206,000 that went out to about 418 artists, really addressing immediate need. And it was a pretty dramatic help for those individual artists when they got those dollars.
I'm sure. That's amazing.
A little more about that process.
Yeah, I'll say that the applications we were getting from artists we really helped bridge that time period between the collapse of the hospitality jobs and the jobs in the arts, and the kind of CARES Act, PPP, kind of like all the resources that would come to bear over the past couple months. So I think, by and large, those artists were really grateful for that support. And I think it speaks to kind of the unique position of the arts and culture sector in our state, that we are interconnected and have these relationships that allow us to pivot and move quickly and collaborate. Like we don't do anything without collaboration in this state. And I think that the Artist Relief Fund is really a testament to that.
Well, that's beautiful. I mean, that's awesome that you guys are able to get that together, and I'm sure it's so appreciated. That's amazing that you were able to reach that many artists with that. I'd love to hear about some of the cultural organizations too that you work with. I mean, do you have anything to share about their immediate experience? I mean, I know what my experience has been, but I know you work with these people on a daily basis. I'm sure they're your friends and as colleagues. What's the effect of the cultural organizations in the city?
Yeah, I mean, again, this crisis has hit every organization in different ways, but it has hit every organization. And many of our cultural organizations are made up of networks of arts administrators, of artists, also who are impacted by this. Many organizations were able to tap into the recovery funds, and they were able to get the PPP and the other benefits that have helped them to continue working. I think it's been extraordinary, Josh, to see the way that you have pivoted at the Wilbury Theater, the way it is pivoted in this moment to adapt to new platforms, new ways of taking the mission and extending that into the world. And I think that we've seen that from different organizations. It's been amazing also to see organizations adapt with new civic purpose. And so I think that we've seen so many organizations stepping up to find creative solutions that are really helping the city and the state think new ways about how we can not only contain this, the spread of this virus, but now even as we're reopening, where are the solutions, and how can we together find new ways that we can be?
Yeah. Thanks, Stephanie. What are some of the things, what are the precautions that your department has had to take? I mean, I know you guys present PVD Fest, which is one of the greatest, maybe probably the greatest festival in Rhode Island. I mean, it's such an amazing time every year. It's unfortunate that had to be canceled. Can you talk about the decision that went into that and whatever else you may have had to do?
I mean, that was a really hard decision, because the thing about PVD Fest is that it is made up of thousands and thousands of creatives, and we knew that. Last year, we engaged 2,000 local artists in that work. I mean, it's an extraordinary effort, and it's every part of the creative ecosystem coming together to make it happen. So it was a really considered decision made in concert with Providence's emergency management authority, really thinking through what were the possibilities. And just like arts organizations everywhere, went through a series of scenarios about what might be possible before ultimately coming up with the decision that we had to indefinitely postpone that in-person gathering. This time of year, actually, we were joking as a staff, because for the first time in 5 years, we had the opportunity to have a Memorial Day weekend. Usually we're busy building the festival, all coming together and sort of crazy trying to make it happen. And so without the festival happening on the same scale as it was, you know, it's a totally different summer for us. We are able, though, I will say, I'm very happy to say that there were some aspects of the festival that we can still present safely. So the public art will be installed. So there were 3 commissions that we had made, and so those will be going up and on view this summer, which we're happy to say that there'll be a little bit of PVD Fest out this summer. And there's a couple of other activities that we'll be announcing over the next week. So there are still ways to have the spirit of PVD Fest help us through the summer here.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Thanks. And the 4th of July fireworks were unfortunately also postponed.
Yeah, so unfortunately that too was not possible. But on that front, you know, we're trying to think about ways in which we might be able to celebrate at home, but then together share it online or in other ways. So there's still a collective celebration because we know that an important part of community life, right? Public celebrations, they have a role that really sustains us, and that annual tradition, we don't want to let it go entirely.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Brandon, can I ask you, has there been anything from, I mean, are all 4th of July fireworks canceled through all city governments, or are some still thinking about it, or has there been a Department of Health ruling on that?
To my knowledge, I believe all are canceled. Josh, I think currently, you know, being in phase 2, those gatherings should be limited to no more than 15 people. So that makes a large event like a fireworks display pretty challenging. And I'm not sure, I can't really say when we might move to phase 3, which allows for social gatherings up to 50 people. It's, you know, a combination of looking at some of the metrics that I mentioned earlier, and then also making sure that we have capacity to be testing and contact tracing individuals very rapidly. So I think it will be at least several weeks before we see the governor considering phase 3, perhaps later into the summer. So unfortunately, that means I think that some of our favorite large events for June, like PVD Fest, Pride, 4th of July events are probably not going to happen, at least in that classical way that Stephanie was mentioning, maybe in some sort of different online engaging approach.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Brandon. Thanks for clarifying that. So Micah, maybe you can tell us about the work that that all of you at the department have been doing to sort of look towards the future. Like what's next as we start to get into phase 2? What can we look forward to, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll say that my whole team was probably getting annoyed with me as I was saying, yeah, we're mourning the loss of all these things, but what's next? Like, when are we gonna plan for the re-emergence? And there was this period in which we were in triage mode, and especially, you know, getting lunches to kids who were out of school, these like very basic human needs that the mayor's team and our city colleagues really jumped into action on, and that Stephanie has been in a really interesting way, and I think this probably isn't true in all cities, you know, a part of that decision-making process and including the voice of the creative sector in that work. But we have worked closely with our colleagues at RISCA to start these conversations about what re-emergence for the sector is going to look like. And, you know, in a lot of ways, we're not the authorities, right? We neither have the public health expertise nor the logistical expertise to make concrete recommendations to every organization, but we know how to ask good questions. And I think what we've come up with in response to the really official documentation that's being created by the Commerce RI folks and the DOH, you know, in consultation, is what we're calling a re-emergence rubric. And it's really a series of questions that organizations of all types can ask themselves to help figure out what is their threshold, right? So in some ways, the first threshold for people is going to be, how can I get my staff or my back of house team back into the space to get it ready for patrons, right? So that's the number one concern, I think, for people right now is, do I have enough PPE? is there enough physical space for us to be socially distanced if we're going to be spending any significant time together in the office or the, or the theater or whatever? So those questions happen first, but then, taking a step-by-step approach to planning, how does figuring out the plan for the staff lead into a bigger conversation about what it might feel like to bring an audience back? So what we're hoping is that we can start having both individual conversations and shepherding these larger communal conversations with RISCA around the specific pieces of that Reopen Rhode Island template that's so important for everybody to use. Like, that's really the official documentation. And we see our rubric really as a kind of series of more detailed sector-specific questions that will help people get to the point where they can really articulate that plan for themselves. But like, let's all work through this together. And maybe your threshold is phase 4. Maybe the business model just won't work for your venue. But we want you to be confident about that so that you can really own that decision for yourself. Does that make sense?
I think so. That sounds great. Stephanie, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to say that, as we enter into phase 2, we understand that there are almost as many questions as there are guidelines. And so actually, I've been in meetings all day today to kind of consider what the governor has offered us and what's missing from that and what's possible. So the mayor's executive order is in place until June 5th, and we know that there are some questions that we'll need to answer before he can update that. So he's planning to update that soon, but it does allow for limited business, as Brandon mentioned, but it also allows for creative solutions. And so I think we're working really closely with businesses, with nonprofits, with individuals who have ideas about how they can meet those guidelines for safe distancing, providing PPE, the sanitizing plans. And we're really trying to work together to make sure that as many businesses as possible can come through to the other side. I think we've seen with the outdoor dining, the city quickly put up the Rethink PVD website, and the city service team, which usually is responsible for, vetting special events, has been helping to advise the city about what do those outdoor dining options look like. So, that's the other thing. We're using our expertise in different ways in this time.
Well, it's great. And this self-assessment tool that your department and RISCA has collaborated on to put together is incredibly helpful as somebody working for an organization. So people can find this on your website, artculturetourism.com, and then they'll find it from there, right? And we'll also put the link up on this video. So thank you for sharing this. Is there anything in here that you would like to highlight? I mean, for me, I think these are great questions, and I wonder, one of these, just going down a little bit, how will you adjust your repertoire of blocking human organization on stage to ensure proper social distancing? I think that's such a great consideration that probably hasn't even entered into a lot of, theater makers' minds at this point. It's, we'll sit the audience 8 feet apart, yada, 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 but well, how am I going to have 2 actors up there talking to each other, So I think these are really great questions. As organizations consider these, what's sort of next steps for these questions? I mean, are they supposed to write down answers to these questions and submit them to your office or to somebody, or is this just a way to get the wheels turning?
Can I answer that, Stephanie?
Yeah, no, you go, yeah.
Please do not look to us to legitimate your opening plan. That is something that the state and city guidelines will determine. Licensing, entertainment licenses, that's still we're still in that emergent phase that Stephanie spoke about, the state of emergency. So, but it's on the horizon. So I think our hope is that people will continue to be in touch with us, but please also think of us as thought partners and connectors to help you envision the kind of reopening that that your community will benefit from. And I think, everybody knows their organization best, right? You know your space, you know your audience, let us be thought partners with you, and this, you know, tool will evolve. It's not made to be a static thing, but hopefully it leads people to that official Reopening Rhode Island template that they'll need to post in their building for their staff and for their patrons. That really is designed to both be a specific checklist about the dues of the public safety stuff around the health emergency, but also to give confidence to the public that we're thinking about this stuff. I mean, it's an incredible there's a tension between the kind of individual responsibilities that we all have to take on the work of keeping each other safe, and then the collective responsibility that our institutions, both our cultural organizations and the city and the state, have to like make sure that we know how to do that in ways that make sense. Is that a good course correction? Like, don't send us your plan and ask us to sign off.
I also want to just say one thing, Josh, which is that, you know, what those questions, we develop those questions, but if people have feedback, you know, if those questions are confusing or they think there should be additional inquiries, Brendan, I'd love to hear, you know, from your perspective if we're missing anything on that front, but it's really meant to complement Commerce's control plan and really be about industry, but we want to hear from you. And we want to update that as conditions change, as we learn more about what reopening looks like for different kinds of art spaces.
Yeah, and Brandon, I don't want to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, do you have any like feedback? I mean, as you look at this quickly, does anything seem like it's missing maybe, or is there anything that you wish that you saw here?
I think it's fabulous, Stephanie and Micah. I think there's a lot of questions here that wouldn't have been on my mind, you know, as someone who likes the arts and goes to theater, I still wouldn't have thought of all of these various challenges that different organizations might face on the back end. So I think it's a fantastic way for organizations to start thinking about some of the challenges in this era, and then how to overcome them. And I loved your point, Micah, about it being a living document. You know, the epidemic is uncertain at this point. We don't know what the future holds necessarily. Will there be a second wave in the fall? Will there not be? So, you know, some of these may become less critical over time. We may also have to sort of revert, unfortunately, to sort of more restrictions. So I think I like the approach of being flexible in this era and adapting to where the epidemic takes us, and supporting organizations to make decisions that are best for them and, you know, in the best interest of keeping their audience safe.
Yeah, and another point, Micah, that I like that you brought up is that this is also, not only is it great for organizations to be using this document as a way to think about things, but also in terms of public confidence. I mean, like, it seems like every day the New York Times is running an article about how theater audiences won't be willing to return until, you know, or only 20% of people are going to come back to the theater within 6 months. And, you know, it's just one thing after another. And I feel like this kind of, to be able to share this thought process with an audience, I feel like is incredibly valuable too for organizations.
Yeah, and I'll say that we have been voraciously reading over what national organizations and, you know, Stephanie and I attend, and Lizzie Arujo attend countless like webinars trying to get more information from and promising practices in the field. And, you know, some of this stuff comes from conversation. So Brandon, you and I and your partner Mike having a conversation about face shields and how they work. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know, theater artists might want to use a face shield as opposed to a mask because, you know, so much of the grammar of that work is in your expressiveness, you know, in your face. Like we were joking, I don't remember who I was talking to about, you know, we're going to go back to the like amphora and like Greek theater, you know, outside, like everybody's going to have these like different masks that they're wearing. So we're going to have to lean into some of the possibilities that these restrictions afford us, as opposed to always feeling like the weight of the challenges, like, because I think we're paralyzed if we stay there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Yeah, we had a staff meeting the other night, and Christine brought up that, the idea of not rushing back, even if the governor says you can have 50 people, not opening a play with an audience of 45 people, and just doing it because you can, but to being considered and to use this as an opportunity to maybe let the restrictions force us to be more creative and better at what we do. So I really appreciate the work you guys are doing. Thank you. And this is just one of the two things that you are collaborating with RISCA on. Is that right, Stephanie? You, RISCA, and you have also put together this workshop series?
Yeah, I have to say we've really been partnering with RISCA on several things, but we are doing Wednesday noontime brown bags almost, really talking through the reopening realities. We did one last week thinking about different spaces and some of the considerations that are addressed in that self-assessment tool. And future ones will look at PPE, look at safe distancing, looking at sanitation, look at those particulars, and engage with experts in those fields. Actually, I think you inspired this thought that we should be talking to experts in the field, not just within the sector, about the possibilities of how we can approach reopening creatively, and really help to build up the resilience of the sector as it is probably a phased reopening.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited. I think it's a great resource for arts organizations. People can see that at risca.online/arts reopening. But there's one coming up on insurance liability and that whole issue. If somebody comes to the theater here and gets sick, what liability does the organization have? And there's more. I hope people go and check it out and just see. And these are open to anyone, right? Whether you work for an organization or just curious.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, it's about learning together, I think.
Well, that's great. Thank you. So are there other steps besides keeping these resources in mind that as things progress through phase 2 in June, and then it sounds like nobody's committed to a phase 3 in July yet, is my understanding, but it sounds like that's being talked about. Are there other considerations or other steps that will need to happen? For example, the entertainment license issue, when we're ready to reopen, how will we go about reopening from a very technical standpoint? What are the steps necessary?
Yeah, so, I think it's easy to, in some ways it was easy to shut everything down at one time, but the reopening is going to happen at different times based on the particulars of your organization. So even with entertainment licenses, we see that the restaurants and bars are reopening, but if you don't have a kitchen, then you're still not, the entertainment licenses are still not open yet. But we are preparing again for a time when the guidelines from the governor's office will allow for a small gathering, and those entertainment licenses will be available. And then, Josh, I think as you point out, each organization will have to decide if they are ready, and in what ways that they'll present some modified form probably of what they did before. And there is no timeline for this. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of wait and see, and as Brandon knows, those uncertainties, there's so many variables here that it's really hard to give a precise date for when these things will happen. I think that's one of the elastic things that our minds have to do in response to this, is really to look at the characteristics to understand where we are today, and then decide what might be possible for your organization, for your program, and make decisions based on that. I think, just to speak to the audience confidence piece though, I think communication is essential. And so I think in every way possible in which an organization can really be honest and frank about where they are and what they're thinking, that is going to inspire confidence for audience members to come back. Posting information about the sanitation plans at the theater, will probably make them feel more comfortable, or whatever the modifications that are being made to allow for these reopenings.
That's good.
Yeah, I'll add, Stephanie, that I think one of the things that arts organizations can and should be doing as they get ready to pull the trigger on Re-Emergence is really engage their audiences. Like, make sure that because you want your audience to trust that, if they buy a ticket, they know what the policy is about. If I show up sick, can I get an exchange? Or I shouldn't show up. Don't even show up sick.
Don't come. Yeah.
Don't come. But just like knowing that, say if I'm a Wilbury patron, that I not only know what to expect, but that I'm being engaged, that I'm a part of this community. I mean, I think we have a real chance right now to firm up these loose ties that we have to audiences and say, we need you, you need us, like we're in this, through thick and thin. So I really appreciate what you all are doing on that front of really keeping the audience engaged in this conversation.
Thanks, Micah. Thank you both. Thanks, Micah. Thank you, Stephanie. For all the work that you do to support the arts and to make our work possible all year round. Thank you, Brandon, for being here. This has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate you all taking the time to help us talk to our audience this way. I feel like there's not a lot of opportunity for us to hear from people within our community about the work that we're doing to reopen. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
People should go to artsculturetourism.com and check out your self-assessment tool and Riska online. Oh man, did I mess up that URL? Riska, what is it? Micah, what is it? Go to the Riska website.
Riska.online /arts-reopening /
The Riska website.
Thank you.
Riska's ready for you. You can just go to their blog.
I'm ready for it. Yeah. Well, thank all of you. Thank you for participating in this. Thanks.
Thanks for hosting.
everyone.
Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.